Working with Elvis Presley at 6½. That was really my first job. And Elvis was such a gentleman. I remember there was one scene and I was just homesick. And so I started to stutter my lines. It gets worse with every take. And then I just remember my relief when Elvis said, "That's a wrap. The little lady and I are going for dinner." And he took me to dinner and I started crying and telling him how homesick I was. After I married my husband, when he was in office, one of the first things I did was I invited all the former first ladies to come over. And one of the things that they all emphasized was never let the work get ahead of your family. Because you will look back and in the blink of an eye, the children are grown. The message I heard early on was be yourself and balance your time not to what other first ladies have done, but just to what you enjoy doing. And that was wonderful. I have memories of my grandmother. She was a wonderful role model for me. Perseverance was really her mantra after World War II. My grandfather died, and here he left her with 10 children to raise. And bound feet, no education. She said, you know, when I was like 5 or 6, they were binding up my feet. And she remembered saying to herself, you can break my bones, but you cannot break my spirit. And you know, that carried over to her. What a woman. As you mature, you start thinking about what really do I want to leave behind? Is it just a successful business that can change very quickly? Or is it a legacy that says we created jobs, we trained people well, we gave people opportunities, and beyond that, we implemented some practices that would help our environment and better our community at the same time? I think that's a much more meaningful legacy.
Greater Good Radio. Connect, learn, heal, and grow. This Greater Good archive video is brought to you by Brain Gain Hawaii, a boutique executive recruiting, career development, and coaching firm. Learn more at braingainhi.com.
Welcome to Greater Good TV, where leaders inspire leaders. I'm your host, Evan Leong, and with me is my co-host, Carrie Leong.
Thanks, Evan. The people of Hawaii may recognize her from her role in the Elvis Presley movie, It Happened at the World's Fair. But most people will recognize her as one of Hawaii's former First Ladies. She now serves as the chairman of the board of the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii and is the president and CEO of United Laundry Services, Inc. Please welcome to Greater Good TV, Mrs. Vicky Cayetano. Welcome to our show, Vicky.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So you're a very well-accomplished woman. You're involved in the community and business and several organizations. You're a mother. In a nutshell, what are you up to nowadays?
I recently took on the helm as the chair of the Chamber of Commerce, which is a one-year term, and working with the president, Jim Tollefson, and our board, I'm very excited about what the Chamber can do, not only in the business community, but, you know, as members of the community at large. So I'm really looking forward to this year.
Why did you choose the Chamber to dedicate your time to?
Well, actually, as a director of the Chamber, and you know, the chairs are rotated every year, and they had asked me if I would consider taking on the position. And I feel it's an opportunity to do a couple of things, which is what I'm trying to address now. And one is bringing balance to business. As a business person, I know the challenges of getting all wrapped up in your business and not having time for anything else. And I think we need to bring balance. One of the issues I'm really focusing on is about sustainability. And what does that mean? What I'd like simply for businesses to start thinking about, whether small or large business, is the decisions that we make today. Have we thought about how it will impact our community 5 and 10 years from now? So I think giving that some thought. The second thing that I'm really trying to work with our tax committee and champion through is a reduction in the unemployment insurance contribution. So I felt it's an opportunity to not just grumble about what government needs to do, about what business needs to do, but to step up to the plate and working together with everyone else, try to address some of these key concerns.
You think you can do all that in 1 year?
We have a wonderful staff, a great board, and very hard-working committee members. And much of this work, to be fair, has already been started, you know, under prior leadership. And, you know, I was vice chair, then chair-elect. It's pretty much a 4-year cycle that we look at, and then I'm chair now.
Have you always thought that way and had that philosophy that everyone has to work together and we have to be responsible for our decisions, not only today, but look forward how it's going to impact everyone as a society?
I think working together has always been a theme for me. However, I have to be honest and say that in my younger days, I'm not sure I was nearly so concerned about others rather than just thinking about making yourself succeed. And it's like kind of like the survival among the fittest mentality. But as you mature, as you have children especially, and you start thinking about what really do I want to leave behind? Is it just a successful business that, can change very quickly? Or is it a legacy that says we created jobs, we trained people well, we gave people opportunities, and beyond that, we implemented some practices that would help our environment and better our community at the same time? I think that's a much more meaningful legacy.
You're not actually from Hawaii, even though you look like you are. How did you end up here?
Well, I was born in Manila, and my family immigrated to the mainland when I was about 3.5 years old. My sister actually was the reason why we came to this country. She was discovered by Ed Sullivan. I think you're too young to remember, but back then, every Sunday night, people would gather around Ed Sullivan's show and watch it on TV. It was probably the most popular variety show. And Ginny is a pianist. Ginny, too, is her name. And she was discovered just kind of by accident because a family friend who was visiting us from America heard the piano playing. He thought it was the radio. And then he was shocked to see my sister was just all but 5 years old playing the piano, and she played by ear. And then he taped it and then sent it the old style, via mail to Ed Sullivan, who then sponsored us to come over. And that's how we came to this country. I've lived now in Hawaii for about 24 years, and I think it's a perfect place to raise family and have children here. And I hope that our young people who have gone to the mainland to get experience or gone to other countries even will see that too as an incentive to come back and raise their children in this beautiful state.
And you're from a large family of 9, is that correct?
That's right. I'm number 6 in a family of 9 of 5 boys and 4 girls. And, looking back, I feel really grateful that we had a big family because I think we learned a lot of social skills early on. We certainly learned about sharing. When I look at my kids and the luxury they have of having their own bedroom, we never had such a luxury. We would share, there are like 3 bathrooms in our house for a family of 9 children, plus my parents, and plus Grandma often came and visited with us, and she always brought my aunt along because she had the bound feet, so she couldn't really walk around without assistance. So, you think about it, there's a household of 13 people in one family. But looking back, I feel it's such a blessing. It taught me a lot of lessons early on.
Are you able to share some of the lessons that you learned from that? What do you carry today?
Well, I think like sharing and also fighting for your rights, especially middle children. I have this saying that oldest children command respect, the youngest demand, but the middle kids have to earn the respect. We kind of have it right, in between. So I think learning to share, I think learning to compromise, because you don't always get your way. And even before I had friends in the family. So those are very, very beautiful experiences that I carry to this day.
What's the story behind what brought you to Hawaii and what's kept you here?
Well, I think what's kept me here, what's brought me here, I think, is to see that, coming from San Francisco, which is a great city, wonderful to visit. Unless you live in the suburbs, I'm not sure the city's the best place to raise kids. And so I think, Hawaii is really special. And I think having had the privilege and the opportunity to become part of the community, this is a place where friendships really go deep, where people will take the time out of the busy life that we all have, to really value those friendships and relationships with each other. Even for us as a company, we don't just see each other as workers, but we're associates, we're colleagues. We cry together, we celebrate together, and it's very special. It's truly the gift of the indigenous people, the gift of Aloha.
So speaking of all of the people and team building and things that you're involved in, how do you manage your time on a daily basis, and do you have a typical day?
Typical means to be flexible. I do like a certain amount of structure. So usually I start it off early, like around 4:35, and with a meditation time. And then I get on my elliptical and I like to work out while it's still quiet. And then have breakfast, oatmeal, something light. And then if my schedule permits, I load up my little doggies. We have a family of 6 dogs besides our 2 children. And so I'll take them into the office with me. And I usually leave around 6:30. However, I'm starting to see that I need to take a little more time to be at home. So I'm probably going to be adjusting my day a little bit more. I may manage it, but there's always a way to manage it better. And one of the books I read recently, which I think is just fabulous, is this book called Crazy Busy. And it kind of opened my eyes to say that although I may think I have it under control, I'm not really setting the priorities as I would like them to be. I'm now 50, so going into the second stage of my life. It's time to really appreciate the priorities that one has in their life. And so I read this book, and it helped me not just be idealistic about saying stop working, that's not realistic, but about realistic approaches to organizing your time better and how you view your priorities. And so I think it's important to give back to the community, because in giving you receive, but even that, you need to manage what are your priorities. Otherwise, you find yourself all over the place and so stretched out and overcommitted that you stop enjoying the work that you're doing. And I think the most important part of life is enjoying the journey.
So how exactly are you prioritizing your time and then managing it then? Or what changes are you making from this book?
Well, for example, for me, a typical day before is I'd run out before the traffic gets bad, 6:30, and then I'd spend a good 6, 7, 8 hours in the office, but much of it just in the office, my office. And I realized that truly my work is with the people. As CEO, I think you need to motivate and inspire your employees and also see their problems, be available. So now I'm not going into my office, I'm going out on the floor, I'm working with the managers, and then I'm also allocating more time to see customers and, making time there. And then I take my work home. I mean, that's what technology is for today. Why do I have to be in the office to do email? So I'm taking my work home and doing all that paperwork at home. So I've reallocated the valuable time I spend in the office to putting, what do I say are my priorities, employees and customers? Well, then why am I going to the office and knocking away on the keyboard? I should just get out, work with them, then go see customers. Then when I go home with a cup of tea by my side, I can just do all my emails and correspondence. So I think this book is wonderful in that it's also sharing with us how the world has so changed around us. But if we don't realize that we need to take control of it, like technology, have you ever had lunch and somebody gets interrupted 4 or 5 times with a call? It's like, hello, I'm here. I'm here. And
so, living with them.
So I'm like saying, even like that, I remember our pediatrician used to have a certain hour when he would take calls. And that way you were responsive, but not 24/7 always, working. And so I've learned to do that much more so after reading this. It's an excellent book, and it tells us how, have you ever had TV on and you don't even know what's on? But it's just like always on. And all of that, if you don't set up your own filtering screen, it's like intoxication, and pretty soon you're just running around and not really knowing what's my purpose in life. The phone rings, you answer, but was this call really necessary? I keep telling my children, the cell phone is an expensive device to use for, just your chit-chatting. Use the landline, use this for emergencies, calling someone to say I'm late. So I think just taking charge of technology, using it better so that you can have more time, not less time for yourself and for your family.
Have you always been this way? Because, reading your biography, you had so many things listed that you were involved in for a long time. And so I guess you did mention the book Crazy Busy, but did you ever have a time in your life where you became overwhelmed and a little bit unhappy because you just kept saying yes, you didn't want to say no to friends or colleagues that asked you for the assistance?
Oh, definitely. And not just one time. But, it's easy to just slide right back into it and become a slave to the time instead of managing the time. Shortly after I married my husband, when he was in office, I remember one of the first things I did was I invited all the former First Ladies from Nancy Quinn to Lynn Waihee, of course Gina Ryoshi, to come over. and to ask them from a retrospective viewpoint, looking back, was there anything they would do differently? And, one of the things that they all emphasized was never let the work get ahead of your family. Because you will look back and in the blink of an eye, the children are grown, and you'll say, gee, how many events did we go to? Was that so meaningful? So it's balancing. I mean, we thoroughly, all of us, really enjoyed our time at Washington Place and our work with the community. But the message I heard early on was be yourself and balance your time not to what other First Ladies have done, but just to what you enjoy doing. And that was wonderful. And just being each First Lady is so different and unique and didn't try to copy the others. And that was wonderful to feel that you had that ability to be yourself.
So as a businesswoman, some advice, would you say that you always try to keep your family first and then business second? If there were any emergencies, then sometimes business had to get ahead of your children, but your family always stayed close to your heart?
Yes, and I think it's hard though sometimes for children when they're younger to understand that there are these things called emergency. I think that's perfectly acceptable and realistic when you run a business. It's not 9-to-5 job, but it's just that it shouldn't be a chronic situation, because then number one, you're really not managing it so well because you're always in crisis mode rather than planning mode. And then secondly, too, you're not able to delegate. It seems like, if one says, I'm the only one who can solve this issue. So as long as it's not a normal part of the routine, I think there's nothing wrong for children to also learn the lesson early in life that the world doesn't evolve just around you. I want to be there at your ballet, at your hula show, and I go to most, but if once in a while I can't, you have to accept that too. As a single parent for several years, they understood that mom had to go and work and take care and, support the family too.
So I'm wondering, did you ever feel like it was a disadvantage? Because, as a woman, we want to take that lead role in nurturing of your children and making sure that you spend that time with them as they grow up. So did you ever feel that it was a disadvantage? Because, your husband is in the limelight, right? So there's a lot of things that he's involved in and would like you there by his side. But like you said, family was first.
I think it's important that spouses are very supportive of each other, and now we have a role reversal. So hubby stays at home and he cooks and he does a wonderful chili and spaghetti. And staying at home is a full-time job, and in many ways even harder, I think. I give moms a lot of credit, because if that is a 24/7 job and often thankless, and it is priceless what we do with our children at home. I think as a woman, if you choose to have a career and also want to work, it is a little bit more challenging. You can keep saying quality time, but there's also a thing called a certain amount of quantity has to be spent. So personally, I think that one, if you have a job that's very demanding, then you need to make sure that there's some backup support, whether it's in dad or grandma to help out. And two, to really communicate to the children so that they don't feel like they're second priority. And I think if you do that, you can still do both. Now, for a lot of moms who work part-time or have a job that ends at 3, I actually think it's good for them to get out and to always be able to communicate and work with other people, not just talk kids' vocabulary and I'm so lost. I've talked to some who've stayed home all their lives, and when the children go off to college, at the age of 50 or older, that's a hard transition. They feel really lost. So I would encourage, I have a niece and she has 2 young boys, but they're both, one in preschool, one in school, and don't come home till 3. So she's working part-time, and I think that's the best balance.
Have you ever felt that there was the glass ceiling or discriminated against as a woman ever, especially in business?
I think that it's how you look at it. I think that sometimes being a woman, as let's say like on a board where it's mostly male dominated, if you feel a little strange, I think it's more your perception of it. But the fact that you're on means you're welcome, you're invited. I've never felt that from myself. I will say that I think when a woman is tough, that the community at times tends to be a little bit more judgmental. They use a different word for it. Whereas with men, they'll admire it. Oh, he's really a tough CEO. But somehow for a woman, I think they're not quite used to that. But having said that, I will say that I don't think as women we should try to be like the men. I think we can govern and administer in our own way with just as much firmness, but with a different approach, you know. And so I think when I say something, my staff knows I mean business, but I really don't have to have four-letter words mixed in with it or anything like that. It's not necessary. I think women, we tend to be a little bit more nurturing, a little more detail-oriented. You know, I think those are some of the traits that we just naturally have within us.
So how was it for you? Because, you know, you married former Governor Ben Cayetano, and then, you know, you're a businesswoman at the same time. How was the transition for you? Because you kind of have this title First Lady, but yet you want to be your own individual person that is also succeeding in your own career and in your own efforts.
Well, I feel very fortunate in that I think my husband was very supportive. He never once said, you have to choose, you can't work, you've got to be First Lady. In fact, he told me, you know, being First Lady will be as much or as little as you want it to be. You can just say, I'm First Lady, that's, I'm not going to go to any of these events. And he was actually okay with that. And on the other hand, he said, if you want to really embrace the role and, you know, choose issues that you want to be in the forefront of, I'll support you too, which I ended up doing, you know, long-term care initiatives, the initiative to keep children alcohol-free, which was a national initiative, which with about 30 over First Ladies, which to this day I'm still involved with. And so I did choose to do that, and he was always very supportive. And I felt a little more comfortable because fortunately for me, this was in the 90s where most women didn't just have one role. We all multitask and do multiple roles. And so I felt like I represented the majority of women today. That's the face of the women in this generation now. We work, we have our families, we're spouses, we're also caregivers, many of us to our parents, grandparents. So we do juggle, and we want to work in the community as well and give back.
How'd you balance your business when you were in First Lady role also?
Great staff. I think that's important to delegate, but I did go in almost every day still, and with technology, with email, never more than, you know, a phone call or an email away.
Did you hold back on aggressive growth during that time, or were you still business as usual?
No, you know, our plans to grow, it was not dominated by this role, and if I felt that my role as First Lady would have interfered, I would have been the first to share with my board that I could not do it because it's not fair to the company. But we actually did a lot of planning in that time for the laundry that we opened last year in Kona, which was about 5 years in the planning. So actually that was when, you know, we were in office still.
I'm kind of wondering how it is to be the First Lady. Is there a lot of pressure on your shoulders? Because pretty much your husband is the governor, but, you know, you still have this title. What's the feeling?
You know, overall, I really enjoyed the role. I will say that during election campaign time, things can get a little ugly, and I just kind of got to the point where I wasn't reading the paper or reading the letters, especially because you're a human being, so you feel like you need to defend your loved one, you know, and I know my kids, it bothered them. And so I know towards the last maybe month or two of election season in '98 that I just didn't read the papers. And again, I always tell my children, you know, people can't evoke a response out of you if you don't allow it. You can control the pulse of your emotion. It's your reaction. And I respect that people have a right to say what they want. But if it bothers me, then I just set up my own filtering screen, and I just stopped reading the papers till after the election. But that was the only time when I felt it was difficult. Other than that, no. You know, I mean, everybody was just very gracious and warm and very appreciative of our efforts.
Seems like you're pretty take charge. You know, you have a situation, instead of complaining, you go and do something about it. Were you always like that, or did somebody mentor you that way and help you out?
You know, it's an interesting question because I was thinking about that myself, and my younger brother reminded me, you're always like that. You're always, the glass is half full, not half empty. And he shared with me some memories when he was complaining about certain things, and I would say, well, do something about it. You know, you have a choice. And he said, you were like all of 12 years old, but you were telling us all, that's your choice. You allow yourself to wallow in sympathy for yourself. You don't need to take charge, you know. So he tells me I was always like that. I certainly had wonderful mentors in my life. You know, one was my former chairman, who's passed away now, Stanley Takahashi, and I just thought the world of that man. And he taught me a lot, I think, about how to be fair and yet how to be tough at the same time. I think that's what I learned from him. I have some even now who work with me that I feel I learn a lot of life lessons from. Learning is an ongoing, you know, to the day you die, you never stop learning.
What are some of the lessons that you have currently learned?
Well, besides realizing that, wow, time has gone by so fast. I'm now 50. You know, the first half of your life, I think the first 25 years seems relatively slow. And then the last 50 or 25 years of your life, I think just like the blink of an eye. So I think what I've learned is that if not now, when will I start taking more time to do things for myself and not feel like I'm being selfish about it, you know? I deserve this, yeah.
What lessons are you taking from these people that are mentors or colleagues that you're trying to teach to your children as well so that they are successful in everything that they do?
Well, I think one is that because I tend to be very responsive, is not to react to everything and treat it like an urgent matter. You know, to pause, to think, to be responsive but not reactive. And I know both my kids, though they certainly have a good approach to life, because they're young, they do tend to have a sense of urgency to everything, you know. Even going out that night is really urgent kind of thing. So I think that I would share with them that look at life as a journey, as a whole viewpoint of from 0 to 75, 95 years, not just at this stage, you know. And what you do now, think of the consequences of your action 10, 20 years from now. Because I think if you can do that, at the end of your journey, feel much more fulfilled and purposeful in what you've done.
What was your first business?
Working with Elvis Presley at 6.5. No, that was really my first job when you think about it. And you know, even at that age, I am so thankful that I had that experience, because I think that experience taught me a lot about discipline. We had to get up really early and practice lines, read the script.
Could you tell us what the role was and what you did?
Well, I played the role...
And how it came about?
Well, that's the interesting question. I played the role of a matchmaker. I mean, it's really a typical Elvis movie. Matchmaker, girl meets boy, you know, Elvis is the boy. But that role was actually supposed to go to my sister, Ginny. As you know, I said earlier, she had been discovered by Ed Sullivan. She's very talented. She had done one movie with Elvis called Girls, and she had a very small part in it. And the same director wanted her for this movie that he did, I think it was like a year after Girls, called It Happened at the World's Fair. Well, my father, bless his heart, he'd already committed Ginny to perform for the late President John Kennedy. And so he was like, oh, I cannot cancel that. So he starts looking at me, and I think this idea came on, and he told me that I'd been selected, okay? And of course, I was all excited. And then he sent me with a governess, I mean, somebody I didn't even know that well, because my mom and dad had to accompany Ginny. So here I am, the minute I walked in, even a 6-year-old could tell. I knew from the face, the director's face, it's like, this is not the girl we had selected. So they had me read for the part, and I did, and I was like, oh, how could you do this, Dad? But I just went for it, and then the next thing I knew, we were flying up to Seattle. You know, it was the World's Fair, 1962. But what an experience, and Elvis was the nicest man. I mean, such a gentleman. I remember there was one scene, and I was just homesick. And so I started to stutter and, you know, my lines. And you know how it is when you start stammering? It gets worse with every take. I mean, this must have been like 30 takes. It was bad. And I knew it was going to get worse. And the director was Norman Torok, who was a really big guy. And I was so intimidated. And then I just remember my relief when Elvis said, that's a wrap. The little lady and I are going for dinner. And he took me to dinner, and I started crying and telling him how homesick I was, because my family, they weren't with me. It was just this governess. And he listened, and the next day we did the same scene. I just went right through it, you know, no problems. And that stood on my mind that, you know, when you have that kind of influence, if you can make people feel good about themselves or feel better, make them feel comfortable, what it can do. I mean, here I am, 44 years later, and I still remember what he did. And it was a great experience. And interestingly, you know, Kurt Russell, the actor, he got his debut on that film. And he had a very small part. And we were being tutored together. And I remember he was telling me how much, oh, I really like this. When I get out of school, this is what I'm going to do, you know. And I was telling him, that's not what I'm going to do. So you can see I do laundry. I was just too young, I think, to be away from the family. But it was a wonderful experience, all of about 2.5 months. And taught me a lot about discipline, about being, I think, you know, on stage. Although I remember when I was doing the scenes, I really felt like I was the character. Sue Lin was her name. And it was wonderful to be able to go to a city like Seattle in all its glory then for the World's Fair. So it was a great learning experience.
Can you see yourself going back to it now that you're older? Well, you have 2 children, so maybe not, right?
Oh, no. Yeah, my sister's really talented. That's her forte. But for me, no, I enjoyed it, but more singing with family, not so much as a professional venue. That's not my style. Yeah.
I read in your bio that you had left Stanford to start a business of some sort. Can you take us through that decision and how that came about?
Well, I just got restless and, you know, I think feeling the tuition costs and the pressure. I think it's a decision, very honestly, looking back, that I regret now, you know, because all it was would have been 2 more years. But I was anxious to start a business, which I did, and it did well, and I ended up selling it. But still, I think I could have done it 2 years later.
But what happened? I mean, you got a business started part-time and...
No, I just left to start a business full-time because I had met someone who had a connection, and I thought, oh, I could fill the need. And so I think it's this word called youth that's very impatient sometimes. I was all of 19. And so, like I said, looking back, you know, I would not have done it if I, not at this stage now. But when you're young, you tend to make decisions without looking at, like I say, the future, just for that moment. Here's an opportunity, let me do it. And granted, the opportunity worked out, but you know, looking back, I would say that it probably would have worked out 2 years later. I just shouldn't have been so hasty. Patience is not my virtue. I'm still working at it.
So if you look at it, you had gotten into one of the best schools in the country, in the world even, right? So that would be considered book smarts. You started your own business and it's successful. That's considered, I would think, street smarts. Would you say that one is more important than the other?
In business today, you really need to have both. You need to have that gut instinct that tells you to do it, but you need, I think, to not be so risk-oriented. You can also do your homework. I think those are the ones time and again. I mean, you can get lucky, not do your homework and be successful, but I think you'll see that most businesses do well when they have a combination of both.
What were your parents' reaction when you said, I'm gonna leave Stanford and, you know, 9 children? Right? And you're at a good school, and it's like, I'm gonna go start my own business. Were they thrilled?
Knowing myself at that time, I'm not sure that what they thought, you know, would have changed my mind, very honestly. I was very headstrong, and I think that my parents recognized that, and bless them, they've been more patient than I deserve, but I do recall discussions, I wouldn't term it like that, kind of at this decibel. But, you know, when you're young, sometimes you are a little bit too stubborn for your own good. And like I said, I've learned a lot through the years. And I think I'm a far more learned person now for all my experiences and mistakes that I've made through the years.
What's the story behind United Laundry Services? When did you come up with the idea for that? How did you get it started? What were some of the challenges you had to go through to make it happen?
Well, actually, it was not my idea. It was the idea of a gentleman named Masaichi Tasaka. Mr. Tasaka was then the CEO of Kuakini Medical Center. And his idea had always been, he had the vision even back then to say that hospitals should stay to their core services, you know, patient care, not be running laundries, which is what they were all doing. They all have their own laundries. And so he'd heard about me from a friend, and I guess he had always tried to do this, but among the hospitals, the bureaucracy kind of set in. And so his idea was have someone who's more entrepreneurial, do it as a standalone. We come in as partners, you know, all of us together, but let them run it independently of the hospitals. And with that idea, when I looked at Waikiki, I could really see more the hotel side. I mean, the hospitals are great, healthcare, but You don't see hospitals being built every day. Waikiki, on the other hand, it didn't make any sense for these hotels on prime real estate to be dedicating space and labor to doing laundry. So that's how we got together and started it all of 18 years ago, which is like gone by like nothing. And so today we do healthcare and we do, of course, the hospitality market. And then we also expanded to Kona last year.
But what's that like in the beginning? You know, was there a time that you didn't think it was going to work and you guys had to break through that, or?
You can't allow yourself to think it's not going to work. If you think that way, don't do it because all the odds are already against you. If you don't believe in yourself, who will? It was tough, definitely. You know, when we started, we were very small, and that's why I have a lot of respect for small business, because you have to be everything from marketing to HR to accounting to doing the work to knowing your business. You know, you have to have all these roles wrapped into one. I was very fortunate to have at least a group of a board of directors, and they were all very supportive in giving advice. But like they said, if you run out of the money, don't come calling us. So I think you really, at the heart of starting a business, you have got to believe in that idea, because you have to market it and convince others that you've got a solid plan. If you don't, who's going to buy it? You know, so, but definitely there were challenges the first, I would say, 3 years. But you see how we came together, that was the whole concept, really was kind of an insurance too, in the sense that we always had our captive market of the hospital partners that we started out with, and then we added 2 hotel partners. So today there's the 3 hospitals, the 2 hotels, and myself, and the 6 of us. And then we expanded to non-partner accounts. And, you know, so the business has really grown. But without that kind of core support from the board or your partners, however you're formed, it's not going to happen. So you need to get that kind of network going, and then you've got to believe in yourself and in your product.
What do you do personally to build relationships, especially with your clients, your business partners, people that, you know, are close to you?
I think a big part of it is thinking from their perspective, not thinking that you're just supporting them when they need the help, but anticipating, like, for example, many of our hotels are renovating and upgrading their bedding standards. You know, you read all these heavenly bed terms, et cetera. So, you know, anticipating that, you say, okay, what can we do to process these kinds of goods better? And so you got to promote yourself. You have to always be dynamic. You can't rest on your laurels as a business. Oh, well, we were successful, 14 years ago. You cannot. That standard has changed. Even in healthcare, the standards keep changing. So another one, for example, that I can give you is like with the healthcare, we realized that a good part of our population, or those going to the hospital, is an oversized individual. And so we said we need to order patient gowns that don't have, say, a 54 or 60-inch suite, but a much bigger suite in anticipation of this. So trying to see the business from their eyes is what I would share with other businesses, not just from your perspective, but put yourself in your customer's shoes.
When did you start doing community work?
I don't have an exact year or anything like that, but I've always been working, let's say, like when my kids were going to school, with the schools. And then, of course, I think being First Lady, you have tremendous opportunity to go out and do work. And then afterwards, you enjoy it so much that you continue it.
I wanted to go back a little bit when you talked about the NIA initiative for the underage drinking. How was this brought to your attention? Was it something that they sent you information and said, we really need help in making this awareness and helping these children?
It was brought to my attention by my husband's then director of the Department of Health, Bruce Anderson. And he had brought it up because he had been in touch with some other Department of Health across the country, and they had heard about this idea of wanting to put together this initiative. And with the First Ladies, many, to be fair, have been already doing work like that, but individually within their states. Our Lieutenant Governor, Duke Iona, today represents the state of Hawaii on this initiative. Because I'm the emeritus now, retired, in other words. So he brought it to my attention, and I thought it was great that we should all come together, the influence of all the first spouses, or as many as we could get together. And I felt that was a great idea, and so I offered to get on board as a co-chair. So we started with which today we still carry 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, to make sure it's a bipartisan effort,
What would your advice be for younger people in business or people that are maybe putting off doing community work or giving, nonprofit work until they've finished their career or they feel that they're at a certain point? What's your advice to that?
Well, I think that when you do community work, it's not only about making yourself feel good for giving. I think that's just a rule of thumb. To receive, you must give first. But also, I would say two things. One, it leads you to a lot of opportunities to network and meet people. And three, I would just say that manage it so that you don't have to give to everything. But if you just even choose one organization, one day a month, it doesn't have to be daily or weekly, but if you can just even give that much, once regularly, but just set it up as a regular kind of part of your routine. I think that one, you'll be setting a great example in the future for your children. Two, you'll feel good about it. And three, in the process, besides helping others and yourself, you'll have a great opportunity to meet lots of interesting people.
Through your career, you've had a lot of experiences, a lot of learning lessons. What would you think was your biggest challenge and how did you overcome that?
Oh, I think the biggest challenge and also the most rewarding role is that of a parent. Yeah. That's why it's a yin and yang. The most suffering too at times, but also the most rewarding, the most fulfilling. And I think of all the roles, I would say being a mom is the most rewarding role.
So you would consider that your greatest accomplishment?
I don't know that one can say that because honestly, you can only pray that your kids come out a certain way. Much of it is just genetics already. It's their DNA. Are they or not? I mean, you see a lot of kids who are just driven already at a young age. I mean, 9 of us, our parents raised us the same way. We're all totally different. But I just think in your effort of doing, in trying, you should feel very gratified.
Do you consider yourself a lucky person?
Oh, I feel very blessed. No question about it. Living in this place, having the privilege to work with my associates at United Laundry and the people in the business community. I mean, every day I look forward to going to work. And then my husband is so supportive at home. I mean, our roles have reversed now, and he just holds the fort at home. And you need that balance, and you go off and doing your work. If you don't have your spouse to support you at home, it means nothing, So I just feel really gratified. I'm very close to my mom. I lost my dad a year ago, and my sister is very close to me. So, we take time to have lunches and talk about nothing. But just being together, I think that's the joy you have in this journey.
Can you share with us, on a personal note, how you met former Governor Ben Cayetano? What was that like?
I thought it wasn't so personal anymore. I thought everybody knew that we met at the gym. Well, he has his story, but honey, since you're not here to tell it, I'll tell my side. Well, it was early. Back then, he used to actually go to the gym early, and I was working on my bench press, and I saw him coming, and I said, oh no, of all the equipment, he wants the piece of equipment that I'm working on. Well, he's just got to finish it. He was really shy. He was really cute, and he just, hi. He goes, I'm Ben. Oh, what's your last name? I didn't say that. So we just started talking, and then after I was finished, he worked out, and then he asked me, oh, you want to have some coffee afterwards? Remember, it's free at the Honolulu Club. So we had free coffee. Sounds like your kind of date, huh?
Ours is Zippy's.
I'd have her pay.
And so we just started meeting each other at that time, and then it was really interesting. I remember one day after working on, he was just kind of, hey, real cute local guy style, If I asked you out, what would you say, And I said, oh, that would be fine. I'd love to go out to dinner or lunch. Oh, okay. And then he didn't ask me out. So I was like, what is this? So I thought nothing of it. I thought, this is really strange. But then I said, hey, I'm a woman of the 90s, come on. So I picked up the phone and I called his office, And I said, I'd like to leave a message for the governor. Would you have him call Vicky Liu? And they said right away, oh, what is this about? I said, oh, I had told him I'm Vicky Liu, United Laundry. And they said, is this about his dry cleaning outfits? And I said, no. I said, it's not about his dry cleaning. I said, if you'll just give him the message, please, he'll know what it's about. Oh, okay. So then I remember sitting at my desk. I said, if he doesn't call in 2 or 3 days, not interested. timed it, 45 minutes. The phone is ringing. I think he's interested. So then I said, you know, you had asked me if you wanted to go out. And I said, I told you I would love that. And so I'm calling you now and I'm inviting you to lunch. And he goes, silence. So cute. He's really a very shy person. And he goes, he's probably dying if he's watching this, you know. He goes, oh, okay, yeah. I said, how's Thursday? Oh, yeah, okay. Then I said, where do you want to meet? And where would you like to go to? I told him. And he goes, well, I'll call you back. So then he called me back and we had our first date at the Hawaii Prince Hotel. And I still remember, you know, being from San Francisco, I always bring usually flowers. I forgot my husband's kind of real, you know, macho. So my friend overdid it. She has a wonderful floral shop, and bless her heart, she made this huge arrangement. I thought, oh, Kathleen, okay, I'll take it. It's too late already. So I took it, and I walked over to him. I said, hi. And he goes, what's that? I said, oh, these are for you. And honestly, he took it, and he's holding it like this, and then he turned to a security guard, and he goes, Matt, here, take this from me, would you? And this big guy from Y&I, he's so cute. I looked at his eyes. It's like, please, boss, I'll take a bullet for you, but don't ask me to take these flowers. But he was holding these flowers, real big macho guy. And I could sense right there, oh, he is not a Renaissance man. So that's how our first date ended up. And after that, we just started, you know, getting together. But he's actually a very shy person.
So the lesson is, don't let your wife come on without you, man. Give your side.
So then I want to know about the proposal. Because if he's so shy.
Would he pop the question? Yes, with a lot of hints. But that was very special. And so, you know, I think some things we have to keep just between us.
What would you say has been your favorite childhood memory?
Gosh, there's so many. I have memories of my grandmother. She was a wonderful role model for me. As you know, she had bound feet. She never complained. And she would tell me often when I would be complaining about, whether it's about my siblings or whatever, she'd say, you know, you can always choose to say something good or say something bad. And in the breath that you have, she said it in Chinese, like your breath basically translated, that you have, why don't you use it to say the good? And I always remember that. So that's a wonderful memory of her influence on my life, how persistent and perseverance was really her mantra. I mean, you think about someone at that time after World War II. My grandfather died. I never knew him. He died very young. And here he left her with, 10 children to raise. And bound feet, no education. And you have to ask, how did she do it? And I'll never forget when I asked her that, because even as a child, I admired that so much. And she said, when I was like 5 or 6, they were binding up my feet. And to bind it, apparently they break your bones, huh? And she said she remembered saying to herself, you can break my bones, but you cannot break my spirit. And that carried over to her, and what a woman. I mean, so the memories of her, which still live in my life today, the lessons she taught me. That, then I would say the Elvis Presley movie was a great lesson about rejection. Because my dad told me, they selected you, and when I walked in, I was like, no, they did not select me. That's why I have to read again. And then the disciplines, and then just overall, I can't pinpoint one thing, but just growing up in a family where music was as much a part of our day as eating. What a gift. And I don't think a lot of families have that. I took it for granted. But my sister plays piano, you wouldn't believe. And so to hear that every day is just such a marvelous, marvelous gift. My dad would say that you need food for your body, you need music for your soul. And that's really true.
Your parents played a really important role in your life as well. And could you share us maybe some of the lessons they taught and why they're so important to you?
Oh, when I became First Lady, I truly realized what a wonderful mom I've had in terms of how she taught me, because it's not something you learn overnight, but she taught me a lot of the social graces of making people feel welcome, little things that we take for granted. It's moms that instill those details into you. really, she dressed very well. Even as a kid, I remember how she would wear her hat and her stilettos. And she always looked nice. And so I think she set a wonderful example for me of grace and poise. From my dad, I learned about perseverance and hard work. He had a great work ethic, and he really instilled that in us. And that, I would say, really comes from good parenting, not just that they're born with it, but you need to instill that work ethic in them. And I still remember one day, I was about maybe 13 or so, and my dad decided he'd have a little heart-to-heart talk with me. And he said, well, you know, you're not talented like your older sister, which is true. I cannot play the piano like that. And he said, and you're not cute like Liz, that's my younger sister. I was like, well, where's this going, Dad? Great for my self-esteem. And then he says, but I'm going to tell you something. If you think like a man, act like a woman, and work like a horse, I think you'll do just fine. I said, oh, okay, maybe I'll get the roles mixed up and act like a horse, not work like a horse. But he was very practical. He's never minced his words, very much like my husband. He would tell you what he thinks and not try to pretend about it. And so from him, I think I learned that it's better to be honest, even if sometimes being honest can be painful, but you just need to say it like it is, and work hard. And if you persevere, eventually, you know, you'll be able to achieve what you want to do. And from my mom, I think she gave me the gift of being comfortable with people, you know, being able to converse with confidence and paying attention to little details so that people feel special when you meet them.
If there is one key message that you would like our viewers to get today, what message would that be?
Oh, life is so short that I think you need to bring balance to your journey, that nothing here is permanent. So keep in mind that hopefully the years we spend here will be much more meaningful in terms of the legacy that we leave behind.
Well, thank you so much, Vicky, for joining us today on Greater Good TV.
Well, thanks for having me. Nice to meet you both.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.